Hello everyone! Today I will be featuring the Kreml, the upcoming Tier 10 Soviet battleship. Something that we've been waiting for a long time, and well, the matchmaking is heavily Tier 10 focused, as you can see. Only one Tier 8 that's a DD, and then I think, what was it, 2 Tier 9s, everything else is Tier 10. So pretty optimal testing bed in that sense, or example. Now, the Kreml is massive. It's huge in size. It might not be as wide as the Große Kurfürst perhaps, but in terms of length, this thing is a big battleship. Make no mistake about that. It is a huge thing, and well, it shows on the health pool. 108.3k health, which puts it at the top of the food chain when it comes to health. This size and health surprisingly doesn't mean bad concealment though. I've been quite surprised that the concealment is actually 13.4, which is, well, if you remember the concealment builds of the old tier 10s before they nerfed concealment expert, this is what they used to have. I think the Yamato had like 13.5, Montana used to have 13.4. So the Kreml right now sits at those old numbers at 13.4, which is quite stealthy and quite surprising that it's actually stealthier than much of the competition. Now, it's got a bit of a unique thing, or a couple of unique things going on. First of all, you might notice that that long-range dispersion wasn't exactly impressive. And you're going to be seeing a whole lot more of this long-range dispersion, and that's because the long-range dispersion is terrible. And this is kinda by design. The whole idea of these Soviet BBs is that the closer you get to the target, the better your dispersion gets, and it scales very, and well, every battleship has that, but it's kind of pushed to the extreme on these Soviet BBs, where at long range you can't hit anything. At short range, these things are rail guns. We're talking insanely consistent, insanely accurate, but that is only when you get close enough to the target. At this long range, it just complete dice roll if you're gonna hit anything. Now, the guns themselves are 457mm guns, which obviously put them just 3mm away from Yamato's massive firepower. But that 3mm is actually highly important because it means you cannot overmatch 32mm. In order to overmatch 32mm armor, which is what you see most on tier 10 BBs, or tier 8, tier 9, tier 10 BBs, the 32mm armor threshold is very common. And in order to overmatch that, you need 458mm guns, and this thing has 457, just like the big guns on the Conqueror. So this is quite obviously, and the whole thing is probably by design and so forth, so you can't overmatch that magical 32mm. So Yamato still holds that advantage. Of course, these guns still hit like a truck, and if you do happen to get a juicy broadside, and if it's at range, if dispersion happens to agree, the damage is devastating. The AP shell damage is 15.5k citadel damage, and when you got 9 guns, even though you only have 9 guns compared to something like the Montana, if you can get those citadels, the damage is just massive, and it's a scary ship to give a broadside to. At range, not so much. The closer you get, the scarier it becomes. Another thing you might notice is that the turret traverse seems insanely fast, and that's because it is. It's a 30-second turret traverse, which, honestly, I gotta be honest here, it doesn't make a lot of sense having a 30-second turret traverse on 457mm guns. Like, these turrets are gigantic, so not sure what kind of stellinium reactor they got hidden in the ship to be able to move these turrets that quickly, but it does fit the playstyle of the ship quite well. It's this big ship that you want to brawl with, and if you had very slow turrets, then brawling would be incredibly awkward and it would feel terrible and so forth. But that doesn't stop us from questioning the logistics of how on earth they are moving these huge multi-ton gigantic turrets around in 30 seconds. Now, running the reload mod, which I'm running, does of course nerf your turret traverse a bit, but then you can use expert marksman and you get the turret traverse back under 30 seconds, which is exactly what you're seeing here. Now, playing the Kreml is a bit weird in the sense that you don't really want to sit at long range sniping too long. I pushed into B, and now as soon as I notice that there is an opening, and that means the enemy team is very focused up there on C, and they got a huge blob of enemies down at A, This is when I basically seize my opportunity, and I see that I have an opportunity to rush in and do what the Kreml, what the Soviet BBs do best, and that's an opportunity to close the distance and get to brawl. Now, it doesn't really brawl like the Grosse Korpus. In the Grosse Korpus you want to brawl in the sense that you literally want to give full broadside and use all your guns, and you want to circle around enemy ships and so forth. You don't really want to do that in the Kreml, because the Kreml actually has a massive citadel. In fact, all these Soviet BBs have a massive citadel. They got fantastic armor, especially the Kreml. It has 32mm nose, 50mm lower part of the nose. It's got a 50mm deck armor. It's got a huge citadel belt. And the upper belt is 150mm, so it's very resistant to damage as long as you're angled. Full broadside, basically the entire ship is one gigantic citadel. And of course, the fact that it's a huge long ship means that torpedoes are a huge threat. The torpedo belt is only 29%. DDs are very, very scary. The torpedo belt being 29% and this size, you can easily eat like full Shimakaze volleys and just get deleted. That means carriers also want to drop you. Very easy to land all their torpedoes on you, and of course Hakuryu or IGN carriers especially want to drop AP bombs on you because your citadel is so huge, and it's armored well enough to arm the bombs and always get citadels, but not well enough to actually shatter it. So I've had just IGN carriers completely, basically citadel me every single drop. It's been brutal. And midway HE bombers also do massive damage because the ship is so huge. It's very easy to land like massive drops on it. So carriers and DDs are absolutely a huge weakness for the ship. DDs probably especially because the turning circle is so gigantic, the rudder shift is pretty damn bad. But that's not really something that's very unique to the Kreml. Like, there's not really a battleship that doesn't suffer from that. You see the dispersion at close range, how am I able to pinpoint his superstructure? That was an angled Missouri. I got 6 penetrations, not because I overmatched, but because my dispersion was so good that I was able to pinpoint launch every single shell right into his superstructure, and all the shells armed, and that was a huge amount of damage. And I've been able to do this consistently against battleships. So angling against the Kreml isn't really that effective, simply because when you're close enough, you can just target the turrets, you can target any weak points, you can target the superstructure, and you do a lot of damage. I've done 16-17k to angled Yamatos, not by citadeling them, but just by arming my shells on their superstructure. The speed, pretty decent. We do suffer from having that terrible turning circle that I talked about, but you can see we're easily climbing up here to 30 knots just on this small straight that we're taking. Well, 29.345. This is with speed flag, of course. And we're just about to break 30 knots. The Zao gets spotted, and once again, at this close range, these guns, very consistent, very terrifying. And we're getting into this situation that you want the most. This is the situation you want to be the Kremlin. No one's got your broadside, you're able to push in very close to the enemy ships. The problem is, of course, torps. The kid is going to be torping, the Zaos are going to be torping me. But we are able to put these guns to use. And at this range, these guns are... well, let's just say Stalin approves of this dispersion at close range. Zao troll armor, though, is sometimes stronger than even Stalinian guns, but the next volley will obviously kill him. The problem is he's gonna get his torps off, so I'm gonna have to be a bit careful with my angling and how I push in. The AA on the Kreml is also great, so even though carriers will want to target you because of how much damage they can do, it doesn't mean that you're just a free kill. Your AA can absolutely shred planes, and I've certainly seen myself farm a ton of planes as they go for me. So carriers will probably not want to go for you as the first target, maybe later on in the match. Torps coming in, Zao torps of course, and I know there's Kid torps coming in soon. Another thing worth mentioning is, of course, the Soviet damage con. You have a special damage con that you only have four charges, 5 with Superintendent, and it reloads very fast. It lasts for 20 seconds. If you run out, then you're completely out of damage con. But it's very useful for when you make these pushes in. You only have to wait 38 seconds for the next damage con cooldown. So it synergizes very well with this aggressive playstyle that they're trying to encourage with this ship line. You got this huge amount of health pool, this very tanky nose-in ship, and these fast-acting heals. So it's absolutely intended for pushing nose-in the way I'm doing here. This is what the ship does best. Now there are situations where it's very hard to push in, and those are the games where I've struggled to get that much done. If the enemy has some Shimakazes or a couple of DDs that are crossfiring you, or they got a Conqueror just sitting there shooting you all game, your big ship easy to hit, or they're just a carrier waiting for you to spread out, then doing what I'm doing here, which was push straight through B and just basically flank the entire enemy team and just get in there and brawl. Doing this will become exponentially harder, and I've seen it in a couple of games, and it has made the games much worse than this one. That's not to say that the ship is bad though. The ship seems very promising. This game of course ends 222k damage, 10 citadels, 5 kills. Would have been a Kraken of course, and probably some high caliber Confederate shenanigans, but we don't get any achievements in this ship. Team score wise, 2.9k base, 5 kills. The enemy team kind of got rolled. Their entire force in the south, I basically steamrolled it. All I needed was for my teammates to survive long enough that I could get the flank in. And when you get into the brawl with the Kreml, it's kind of like being the fox in the henhouse. You're just blapping ships left, right and center. Like even if you're shooting DDs, if you don't have time to load HE, you're just shooting them with AP, your overpens still deal 1550 damage. So you get like a couple of overpens on a DD and his entire health pool evaporates. It's been very, and at close range the dispersion is so good that you have no issues landing multiple of them. So you just basically blap everything, and 457 is enough to overmatch 25, 27 and 30 millimeters of armor, which is pretty much all cruisers. So you're blapping cruisers left, right and center without any issues. Detailed report wise, 54 hits to do the damage, a bit of secondary shells did a bit of damage. Damage received 113, nowhere near enough to be even remotely scary for this thing, because you got so much health with those heals and your base health. Potential damage 1.3 million, a bit of spotting. Now sometimes you can get a bit more spotting damage. It does have the radar, you probably saw the radar, and now you might be asking, hey Flamu, why didn't you radar that destroyer? That's because that radar is kind of questionable. It actually only radars battleships and carriers, so you can't use it against any of those. And in fact, if you could switch out the radar for spotter planes, I would probably do it, because I think the spotter plane would be more useful. That is to say, I still haven't gotten to experience the Kreml in a Cyclone, and I can imagine having that radar, that 1 minute duration 15 kilometer radar to spot enemy battleships with in a Cyclone. Wow, I think this ship would be a monster in a Cyclone. But I still haven't gotten one, so I guess we just gotta keep playing on it until I can get one of those. But obviously potential is there. I really like the gameplay this ship provides. I really like the design they've gone with. Very vulnerable if full broadside, very vulnerable to both torps and carriers and so forth. But when you get to do what you want in this thing, which is push up and just get in there, then you are the wrath of Stalin himself, and everyone should be afraid. Is it maybe a bit too strong? Possible. I've only played it for 2 days. A bit early, honestly, to make any balance calls at this point, like, oh, it's overpowered, oh, it's too weak. I don't think 2 days is enough to make that sort of call yet. So I'm gonna let you guys decide that one. This was just my first impressions of the ship and some basic stats and numbers. I'll of course get into more detail later, but most of the time when these ships are released, they're gonna be changed like 50 times before you actually see them. So consider this a very early first impression of the Kreml. Let me show you guys the armor model and my recommended build so far, basically what I'm running so far. Now, first of all, I should probably show you guys the armor model, so you understand what I was talking about earlier in the vid. The nose is 32mm, but the lower parts, which protect the citadel, are 50 and 150. Now, you can probably get some wonky citadels if you overmatch this nose with the Yamato and you plunge into the citadel, but the likelihood is quite small. And so far, it hasn't really happened. In fact, the only citadel I've eaten has been a really weird citadel into the conning tower, which somehow I think bounced off the superstructure into the conning tower. A very weird citadel, and it's only happened once. Overall though, 50mm deck armor, 150mm upper belt, 430mm plating on the broadside, 410 in the middle, and once again the stern also 32 with some additional plating on the sides. Worth noting is that the ship is very vulnerable to AP bombers, in a huge area to hit, and not thick enough to arm the AP bombs, but not thick enough to actually shatter them. So you pretty much get citadeled all the time from AP bombers. A very juicy target for carriers in general because huge broadside, 29% torpedo belt, a lot of area to hit, and very easy to AP bomb as well. So carriers will obviously love targeting this ship. Now moving on, module wise, we are premium, only 3 options here. I've ran the premium radar, there's no option for running anything else. I'm not sure if I'd maybe rather run spotting plane. It might be more useful than the radar actually is, since it only affects battleships and carriers. Upgrade wise, turret survival, they are quite squishy. Additional tankiness, bitter dispersion. More additional tankiness, concealment, because you actually can get surprisingly good concealment at 13.4, and faster reload on the guns. The turret traverse isn't too much of an issue because you have such a fast turret traverse on this ship. You lose some by running that module, but then when you spec expert marksman, you regain it and you're below 30 seconds. Priority target to help with torpedoes and in general focus fire. Adrenaline rush, because, well, losing half your health and gaining 10% reload is pretty damn juicy. An additional heal and a radar and a damage con. Oh, Superintendent is actually super good on the Kreml just because you get that additional damage con. Concealment expert, fire prevention. I've run basics of survivability just to help with floodings and fire, and turret traverse. And this is a very bog standard battleship build, I would say, and, well, the Kreml works very well with it. I've tried some other builds, like on the Vladivostok. Instead of running expert marksman, I've ran expert loader and preventive maintenance to help with turret survival. But you gotta keep in mind that this is on the tier 8, you don't have the 3 million module, the 3 million upgrade that reduces your turret traverse, so you have a 30-second turn time here anyway. So as of right now, this is the Kreml build that I've been enjoying the most. It enhances your tankiness even further, and that's exactly what you want, because you kind of want to brawl, you want to push in, you want to pick those fights with the enemy. Flag-wise, obviously the standard things, which means November Foxtrot, faster consumable, speed, heal, reduced flooding, reduced fire duration. I run the detonation flag just so I can make commentary vids and just get gameplay experience in the ship without dying to some stupid detonations. And I run the AA flag as well because the AA is pretty solid. Then the final is just Captain XP. Anyway, that was my early impressions of the Kreml. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys later.